Yep. Okay. I've started it right now. And he knows risk registers. So that first section, he probably won't. He'd be like, oh, I get it. That's all good. Okay. So, what kind of people risk can we have beyond the obvious, but is what we'll be doing for the rest of it. But strategies, right? So, like all risk, actually, I mean, our PMs can probably say there really isn't anything in here that's different from a normal risk. My God, identify, identify, identify as early as you possibly can. When you start a project as a CM and a PM, you sound like, what's the name of that Greek woman? Cassandra, right? Like the one that's always going, oh my God, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Better to be Chicken Little and have more risks on your register and then deprioritize them over time than it is to miss them. Okay, get them as soon as possible. Um, if you think you're going to need to spend money, you need to get them even sooner than soon, because you're going to specifically be asking for risk mitigation funds to address a people risk. Gosh, this one's hard because, man, we argue whether or not change is like tangible and should we get money for it. The answer is yes, and we can make a business case for it, but the earlier you make the business case, the better. Okay, you really need to be specific and not general. I had once at a company where I was putting in an EPPM, and the entire finance department did not want to give PMs control over their own budgets. All right. So they did not in any way, shape, or form want to allow PMs to modify how funds were allocated within the context of their budget. So even though the accountability had been given to the PMs, the entire finance department, when we moved them from one tool to another, lost their ever living minds because we were taking away that control from them. Okay. We identified that very, very early on. It was an entire group was a risk. And that would have absolutely doorstopped the project because they were so unhappy about this change. They were not going to participate in any of the integration with their systems. So you really need to be specific about these people challenges. Get your owners and engage with your people leaders, okay? Same thing as any other risk. Aparna and Joel, your PMs, does this sound at all new to you in any way?
No, not at
Nope.
all.
Yep, it's all very familiar, right? All we're doing is adding into the mix that humans can doorstop projects. So really, that's just your standard change, right? Okay, so let's talk about change resistance then. So we just talked about this finance group who were resisting, and this is a very long and why do they do that? I think I've said to you guys before in one context or the other, we talk about resistance management as one of the key responsibilities of change managers and leaders through change. And if you look at this up on literature online, you will find enormous amounts of material on how you can manage change resistance. What I'm going to ask you to do is, knowing that that's how you can find it, that that's the Google search term, great, okay? And there are lots of useful strategies when you do those searches, but I want you to always be thinking not resistance, all right? It's not that people resist change, it's that they very responsibly and reasonably don't want to do the thing. They just don't want to. Okay. And they usually have really good reasons. We've talked about the change curve. They might be in the back half of their change curve. They're just not ready. Okay. They might not know what the hell's going on. They might not know why they should do it. They might be really afraid. They might have had history of similar changes, right? They might see their workload going through the roof or their job disappearing. They might have existing time constraints that they just don't see how they can wedge this in. They might not trust you or the people that are leading out your change. They might have had a history with those people that really sucked. Like, there are so many reasons why people quote unquote resist change that I think it's really important actually for us to think more broadly about resistance as just a reasonable response to a new thing. And what it's our job to do is to unpack that resistance. Okay. Now, the reason we're going from people risks to resistance is inevitably we start talking about really deep people challenges, so that are not just like infrastructural tactical. It comes down to our problem children, our resistors. That's usually where they say, oh, we've got the CFO doesn't want it, or we've got this team that's resistance and they're a people risk. Okay. So yeah, so we're going to call these resistors, I guess, because we have no choice. But I just want you to think more broadly about that topic. All right. Just muted myself. Sorry about that. All right. So what can it look like? All right. So resistant comes in a lot of different flavors, almost as many flavors as the source, right? And they don't, I wish they mapped well. Mad people don't necessarily all act the same way. But this a friend of mine put this piece together, and I think it's an outstanding way of looking at how you could source resistance within your stakeholder community. And by the way, your executive sponsor could be exhibiting some of this. I have seen um, leaders that are responsible for big project changes who are only doing it because they were told to. So they themselves are passive aggressive resistors in your project, right? So really don't ever assume that even your top advocate is a true advocate for the thing you're doing. Okay, be very careful with this. Anyone in the organization can dig their heels in. And in fact, you should check your own privilege on this one. Okay. This is why I refuse, absolutely categorically refuse to work for hot desking projects now, because I know that no matter how much I try to put on a happy face, I think it's the most stupid idea on the planet. So, like, know yourself, right? You too can exhibit these behaviors, right? So, you'll see it come out in various forms of acting out. You will see it come out in performance changes, right? You will see it come out in the way in which people take on board the thing you're trying to put in. Okay. And you'll also see it in changes in like just whether or not folks show up for work, right? So if you look at a contact center environment, which is the one that the majority of our folks here on this call are familiar with, this is great because you got 200 people to watch at the same time, right? And you're going to be able to see literally at the macro level if absenteeism increases or you start to see an enormous amount of error creeping in, right? Like an increase in error or an increase in AHT, that actually is a sign that people are digging their heels in for whatever reason, right? Maybe you haven't trained it right. Maybe you haven't commed it right. Maybe it's a stupid thing that we're putting in. But for whatever reason, you're going to start to see that pop out. Joel has within his project two people that are actually asking for diametrically opposed objectives for his initiative. Like he's smiling and nodding his head, but it's what he's going to see popping out in terms of behaviors is going to be pretty aggressive and unpleasant if that does not get sorted, right? So it can be at the individual level, it can be at the macro level, and it doesn't always come out the way you think it is necessarily, okay? Can anybody come up with an example from your projects of where you have start to seen some of these things that you might characterize as resistance or digging in their heels? Besides Joel's apocryphal example of his two seniors who are not happy.
We had some of this in our cloud heartbeats that we were attending, just a couple of ones, like even just the first point there, they were like kind of asking kind of stupid questions just to point out, like, like, oh, I hate the way it looks. It's like, really, that's kind of irrelevant. It's like you're just trying to poke to, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's actually really interesting. That's like nitpicking, I think is the way we'd characterize that. That just like complaining with no reason is on this the slide. But yeah, it's that idea of like, oh, I'm just gonna poke holes in it because I'm not happy. Now the real thing here is that was the first time they were introduced. One of the reasons you do early introductions to things is you let people have time to get through their change curve, but you allow them to do the bitching and complaining and moaning before you actually go live. I so much would rather that they were bitching and moaning at that heartbeat than when we go live with the tool, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Anybody else have an example?
I just wanted to check in, what's a heartbeat? I'm not familiar with the term.
Oh, sorry. That's the name of their stand-up opportunity to do training and comms in the customer care center at Genesis. They call it a heartbeat, which is a very clever name. I've been trying to get them to call them the individual ones heart blubs, like your heart going blub, blub, but it doesn't seem to be sticky. But it's so it's a cute name, right? So it's their contact center does a stand-up and they've got little 5 to 10 minute deliveries of whatever change is going in at the time. So great. It's one of their best channels that we can use right now because everything else seems to be email and Teams. Okay. Excellent. So we've got some ideas there. All right. So what is our role? What's the role of the PM and the change manager in managing resistance? Okay. Well, it's a risk, right? Resistance is a specific risk to your project. Why? Tell me why. Why are resisting people a problem? Why don't we just let them resist?
If they've got enough seniority, they can stop your project immediately.
That's you, dude. Your stakeholder matrix man was like, flags. Alarms going off. Yes, they can stop if they're sufficiently senior and sufficiently powerful, either de facto or de jure. Let's say they're don't let go of your de factos. De jure means they have the actual authority to stop you. De facto means they have the social influence or capital. Okay, so you might find those in long service employees that everybody trusts. If they completely demean your project, they could functionally get everybody to not get on board with you. Yeah, they can stop your project. What else can they do? Short of stopping your project, what else can people that are resisting do? Anybody?
They can drag other people down with them.
Yeah, they can drag down the mood,
Mm.
right? There's something we call forgiveness, right? So that we know, it's really interesting in customer interactions. We know that if customers or employees have very high net promoter scores, so they're promoters as opposed to detractors, right? Promoters are willing to forgive you for your mistakes or for things not being easy. Detractors and neutrals tend to be more critical. Okay, so think about some company that you absolutely love that you would recommend to family and friends. Name a company that you think is amazing. Anybody?
Apple.
Apple. Yeah. Netflix. I love Netflix. I'm a huge fan of Wild Wheat, this little local bakery. Okay. Now, imagine that you bought something from them and it came without the user instructions, right? It just got left out. If you're a net promoter, you're likely to give them a buzz and say, "Hey, could you send me the instructions?" But what if it was a Microsoft product, which I think we can all mutually agree sucks, right? And the user guide didn't show up. You're gonna be really cranky, right? So wild wheat, I've bought wild wheat practically like every other day for 5 years. If I got a piece of wild wheat that was just soggy or stale, I would just take it back and forget. I wouldn't fuss. I love these guys. They're the best bread in the world. Okay? I'd completely forgive them. If they're a shit bakery and I get a shit piece of bread from them, I'm going to really lose my mind and I'm going to tell everybody and I'm going to go in and be unpleasant, right? The same works for people within a stakeholder and project environment, right? People that are feeling very positively towards your project are likely to forgive you for it being harder when it goes live, if there's bubbles or bops or it's not 100% what they want. People that are in a negative state of mind are going to be unforgiving. And your resistors, particularly your loud resistors, are the apples that spoil the barrel, right? The rotten apples. Because if they make everybody feel less positive than they would towards your project, at the macro level, they can seriously damage your ability to realize benefits. Does that make sense? Okay, so your role, identify it early, notify the people that can do something about it. All right, make sure that you plan for it and then tell your leaders it's their problem. Okay? Again, like so much of change, we're hired to solve these problems magically. But of course, the fact is that if you have a group of people or an individual who are being really butt munchy about your project, you have almost no influence on them. You, as the change or project manager, are not going to be able to fix that situation. You need to be able to really characterize that problem and then find the person who can do something about it. Okay, Connor, that gets to the questions we were going through today with respect to that issue about cherry picking, right? So in this example, we have a small issue where the expectations of a leader, a team leader, are very different than what the reality is likely to be, right? So the questions I was asking Connor is, who does this person report to? Who does this person listen to? How valid are they? How important are they? How real is their concern? And who can help us with it, right? Because it isn't going to be Connor and I. That's not how that's going to work. It's probably not going to be Amanda either, the more I think about it. But
as much as she'd want it to be.
as much as she'd want it to be, she's not going to be the one that does that. Okay, so your role is not to fix these problems. Your role is to characterize them and then hand them off to the right person who has the influence. That person will either be someone in a position of power or a position of influence with the problem children. Okay. Sometimes you can do broad strategies, but mostly when it comes to individual resistance, it's going to be an individual problem. I'm going to come back to this in one of our things, the tips for making people make the change. I'm just going to leave it in this pack so that you can read the facilitator notes. Fundamentally, this is just another model for helping people through change. You need to make sure that the strategy that your leaders use touches the heart, hands, and head. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there, and we're going to move on. Come back to this. This is functionally how you manage resistance. People usually are resisting on one of these 3 levels, and like ADKAR, are they aware? Are they do they want it? The next step is, can we make sure that we can motivate them, give them the right direction, and help make sure that they can do it successfully? All right, so stakeholder action. What is a stakeholder action? Yeah, a stakeholder action is what you execute when things have gone so pear-shaped that you're having an oh shit moment. You've got a person or a group that actually you're like, no, there's no question. We've got a problem here. Joel and I are at this place with his 2 people, right? The stakeholder action then specifically says, I got a real issue. This person can kill my project. It blends your risk at register with a stakeholder management plan. The reason it's in an email template rather than a register is that usually these are ridiculously sensitive in nature, and you're going to hold them really tightly. Okay. Again, to get that idea that we're going to categorize it. Who is initiating it? Did this problem come to you from someone specifically, or is it you, the change person, that triggered it? What's the business objective that is put at risk? So your project will have like 1 to 5 objectives. Be clear. What business objective, what part of your business case is now at risk because of this? Because we're really literally saying there's a human being between us and success, and we may be actually taking formal action against this individual. What's that going to look like? I need to be able to characterize it against the metric that I'm trying to make money for, right? Like, get hard ass about this, okay? What is the risk that they're posing? So they are, in this case of my example, the business objective is transitioning 25% of the dev team to work from home. The risk is that we have a senior leader who's openly contemptuous of parents, and they're bad mouthing any of our work from home people who have children, and they're souring the barrel. So this could really jeopardize our progression forward. He's a very senior leader. Okay, stakeholders. These are who within the team you are going to bring into the tent to have the mitigation strategy conversation. All right. If it is your business sponsor that is the person putting the project at risk, they're not going to be on the key stakeholder list. Okay. They're going to be the people that these are the people you are actually going to work that are going to work to solve this problem. Right. Now, then you give the background, because usually these kinds of decisions, like you've been noodling on the thing for a week or 2 before you've come to this conclusion, or a month, you've seen this festering boil up, right? You want to provide the context for how it got to where it is, and as objectively as you can, try to stick your own emotional stuff to the side. That's intensely difficult because these are often very emotional situations, and somebody has probably yelled at you, so just try to strip it all out. And then, to the extent that you can, look at what options there are. All right. Now, to give you some idea how sensitive these are, I have done maybe a dozen in the last decade, like not that many. You don't do that many, and almost all of them will have a performance management component to one of the options. It's pretty severe stuff. Okay. It's just they suck. Not gonna lie, they really suck. I get emotional about these. They're always really, really difficult. Ultimately, you use your judgment on your recommendation. If you've examined the options and you've really stripped yourself bare on this one, and you've tried to get it as clean as possible, and you look at the options that are available, you will have a preference virtually always. If you can, make a recommendation, okay? It's a hard thing to do, but do it anyway. It helps the conversation when you have it. Now, ultimately, this will have to be done by leadership. You can't solve these problems. But again, lay it all out there. Okay. I'm going to give you this template. I'll attach it to my reply to you guys with the power, so that you'll have this available to you if you want to just use this template as a framework. I can't actually give you any of the ones that I've written because they're all too sensitive. And just so you know, I had a stakeholder action against my previous company, and the CEO has left the company. They've got the EGM of people and culture is now under investigation, and yeah, so it's I mean, these are serious things, right? Like, no joke. Joel, in your case, it's not as dramatic as this. Okay, it probably doesn't need this unless these two really do get into a cat fight publicly. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think it's as dramatic as this.
No, I actually already have a mitigation strategy. I just haven't shared it with you yet, so I'll do that.
Awesome. Well, that would be awesome. I'm so glad because yeah, I don't think it rises to this level. It's definitely a risk, but I don't think it's a stakeholder action. Yeah. Did they talk to each other? That's all I want to know. Did they have that conversation?
They haven't talked to each other yet. I'm sort of, whenever they talk to each other, it's sort of thinly veiled, like, yeah, thinly veiled bitchiness.
Okay. Yeah, you still might end up in this stakeholder action world because at some point some manager's going to have to step in. But let's see. Let's let that bubble. You and I can talk about that one later. But you can see what I mean, guys. Actually, thank you for allowing us to live share this exercise, though, Joel, because honestly, that's the point. What is the transition between a risk and an stakeholder action? It's like when you've tried everything and you haven't solved it. And that's why it's always emotional when you write them, Joel, because by the time you got to the point, if you had to this, you'd have been in all these tetchy conversations. And so stripping your own emotional state out of it's not easy to do. Okay. All right. Excellent. Stakeholder actions. Lovely. Okay. That's just office politics, right? That's what everybody tells me. These are just office politics. Yes. No. Okay. That's literally stakeholder management and resistance management. Okay. So when do you need help for these? All right. So if they're involving key stakeholders and like you want some advice, always change people are helpful with this. Like Joel and I have talked through this on his little one. You've all probably got stakeholders or individuals that are demonstrating some of those behaviors that we talked about, those dig in your heel behaviors. Are they a risk? Do they need an action? What kind of ideas can you brainstorm? By all means, let's have those conversations with a change person. You do need to engage with ER, if anything, particularly your mitigation strategies involve performance management or any change to rules or structure. Okay, don't do that on your own. By all means, engage with ER. They'll help you out with that. Performance management in particular, most companies will have a very specific process for how to initiate that. They'll want to brief the people involved, like the leaders that are involved with that process on the hows, wheres, and steps. If there's any possibility that's addressing the issue could be addressed through a change in role or structure too. You might need org design or ER to help you out, like an HR business partner of some sort. There are types of people risks and people resistance that actually might impact the organization contractually. All right. So either you're delivering a service and their behavior jeopardizes our ability to achieve a service level agreement we've made with, let's say, a customer, or vice versa. We might have a structural problem. We actually had the beginnings of one on this Nexus project that Connor and Teresa and I are working on, where we have a contractual relationship with a supplier, and there seems to be something wrong with that relationship. So now they've had to put a people risk plan in place, and we've got senior leaders involved, and they're starting to meet with the senior leaders on the vendor side, and they're going to get that shit sorted out. So you might need legal, you might need executives, right? Like if you've got contract relationships, obviously risk is involved, workplace hazards, you might want to engage health and safety. And God help you, if anything you're doing might touch the media, keep in mind some of the projects we put in have media implications and reputational risks that are being introduced if we have really recalcitrant stakeholders. Right. I remember at IAG, we were putting in a bunch of change, and we really had to worry and get ahead of some people who threatened to go to the media with some of the things that we were trying to introduce. So we really had to get ahead of that. We had to have a strategy in place in case there was pillow talk and it got out to the media. Okay, so keep these all in mind and engage these folks if you need to. All right. Questions on people, risks, resistance, and actions. Want to spend any more time on resistance? I've got a whole iceberg to go through. No, I told you I thought this one might be a little shorter, but let's just see how this goes. Yeah. All right. Aparna, you okay?
Yeah, I'm still listening.
Yeah. Okay, Sylvia, you all good? Yep.
Yep, I'm good.
Okay. I think I've got Tayami and Connor. You guys are good. I can see Coral and Joel. I don't know why they've got faces and the rest of you don't, but here we are. So
Oh, they could put the faces on.
I'll stop looking at my presentation and actually look at the rest of you guys now. Hi.
Hi.
All right. So our homework this time is obvious, right? So it's looking at your stakeholders and asking yourselves realistically, do I have any problem children that I want to get ahead of? Do I have any people risks coming from the organization or going to the organization? Is there any intersection of people risks that I should factor in? Is my project going to solve any organizational risks? Is it going to address any? Or is it going to create any? Do that exercise for yourself. It's always helpful. No one's going to thank you if you've created a people risk for the organization at the end of the project that wasn't captured from the beginning, okay? That makes sense?
Yeah. Will you be able to send that? Will you also be sending that out in an email just for Thomas's sake?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. And I'll figure out where I can get the link to this video recording so that he can get to it. If I have to, I'll download it and put it up on my Google Drive, okay?
All right.
Yeah. So now I also just this is the homework just isn't that big this time. That's because your homework next time is probably going to be pretty rough. If you haven't already made a training and comms plan for your projects, you're going to find that's just a painfully long and tedious exercise. Yeah, look at Joel. He's like, oh, yuck, that's going to be fun. So this is giving you a bit of a pass to roll up to the next one where we do comms and training. So I did give you some reading though, just in case you're feeling when I send out the presentation, you'll see, as usual, I tried to get stuff that I thought gave you a really kind of, a nice intimate view of it without going down into the academic weeds. All right, so just like I said, just look up risk. It's a good one. All right, anything I can help you with then on any of your previous work or questions about actions, risks, and stakeholders digging their heels in? No?
Nothing that's coming to mind, but thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'm glad I can give you time back this time. All right. Love you guys. All right. Next time training it comes, man. That'll be a fun
Yay.
one.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
Joe.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.